is 4:45. I will call this policy committee meeting to order. Item 2 is a roll call. Tom Barney, myself is here. Russ Ewert.
Here.
Kim Higginbotham.
Here.
And we're also joined by Eric Brown. Thank you. Item 3, agenda revisions and approval. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
All right. Motion by Mr. Ewert and second by Mrs. Higginbotham. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. All right. Item 4, minutes from September 11th, 2023.
I'll make a motion to approve the September 11th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Second.
All right. Motion by Kim, second by Russ. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That carries. Item 5, new business. Item A, discussion and action regarding updates and modifications to district policies 0100 through 9800.01. Dr. Reuter?
All right. Mr. Barney, this evening we have a series of policies to close out our first batch of the year. And in these policies, you'll see that they're all recommendations from Neola, with the exception of item B under new business, which we'll discuss, which is administrative recommendations when we get to that agenda item. All of the policies have been vetted by Neola and their legal team, as well as provided feedback from our administration. So I will start with our first one, which is policy 2340, district-sponsored experiences. This is a revised of a current policy. The policy is revised to remove references to non-district sponsored trips from language regarding the trip approval process. The policy language retains reference to the expectations concerning student solicitation for such trips as part of the policy, but it moves it to the standalone section instead of combined into one section. This provides a clearer process and delineation of different types of student trip opportunities that may arise in the school context. Adoption of this revision is recommended but not required. You'll see one change in the field trip language. It's more pertinent wording, as well as in the trip approval process for other district-sponsored trips. And then trips not sponsored by the district, the language there protects the district and gives clear-cut guidelines for staff and non-staff when looking to sponsor other trips. I would recommend all of these changes. As you know, as board members, we, it seems like monthly, have requested trips for school-sponsored events, most recently out of the United States, as well as then it gives us guidelines around trips not sponsored by the district as well.
All right. Committee, any questions or comments on this one? All right. Thank you. We can move on.
All right. Policy 2451 also relates to policy, 5250 around program and curriculum modification. This is a revised policy. The language is revised to reflect options included in statute for a designee of the board, which I believe in this policy is myself, to deal with such requests. The district where this process has been delegated to the designee of the board should adopt this revision to assure the board has formally provided for that process. I think we have this policy which is very similar to the one in the 5000 series around students. This is a programming policy, and Neola's recommendation is to consolidate to just this policy and rescind later on the one in the 5000 series. I did speak to a couple board members today, and this one came up as a question of what this might look like in action. I think I spoke to this previously in a different policy meeting. It might have been last spring regarding program modification or curriculum modification, what that means. I can speak to this firsthand. Having been a middle school principal in another district, I had a student who was training that was at the Olympic caliber level as a gymnast. Part of their training regimen was in the Chicago area. They needed to leave school every day by a certain time to get to their training facility in the Chicago area. So that meant they missed a portion of their day. What we did is, with a similar policy, brought forward a program/curriculum modification. At the time, virtual learning wasn't really a thing at the time. So their social studies course, and I believe it was an elective area, was approved by the board to go to a virtual format so the student could still participate in this unique situation, but also be able to be promoted post middle school onto high school and meet the mandatory requirements set by DPI. So this is very unique circumstances that this comes up. I've already been asked by 2 different principals this year around this policy for current students, but their unique circumstance was not a year-long thing. It was a couple-week thing that we could make happen within our school day, versus bringing to the board with a recommendation for a program modification. But those things do pop up as we have kids that have unique circumstances outside of the school day.
All right, thanks for that background. Committee? Any comments or questions about this one?
So they're typically temporary modifications or not long-term?
If I were to bring to you, I'd work with Mr. Miziak and probably the building level principal on any program modification. We'd bring to the full board a timeline of that modification. It wouldn't be inevitable.
Okay.
And if it need be, if they're progressing from, let's say, middle school to high school or elementary to middle school, we would look for new approval if there was a need for program modification as they progress through different levels.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion?
How'd the gymnast do?
She did well. I don't believe she won Olympic gold, but she did well.
Okay, let's move on to policy 2521.
Thank you. 2521 is selection of instructional materials and equipment. This is a revision of a current policy. Our current policy, if you look at the revised version I've provided tonight, if you extract all of the green, our policy is probably about a paragraph. So this adds more detail, and it includes the definition of instructional materials and instructional equipment to distinguish between the official curriculum materials provided to students in alignment with board-approved curriculum as opposed to teacher-created lesson plans, assessment tools, worksheets, etc. that are not considered selected through the process described in the policy. The adoption of the revisions is recommended. I would note that in the second paragraph where the revision starts, for the purpose of this policy, the term instructional materials is defined as supplemental books, readings, activities, online resources, and media distributed by classroom teachers to students for the purpose of teaching the course content in accordance with the board-approved course study, which is policy 2220. So as I think back to our most recent teaching and learning committee, there was discussion about where we are in the process of adopting a new reading curriculum at the elementary level. As defined, hopefully as that goes forward for approval down the road, that will define instructional materials, specifically supplemental books, readings, activities, any online resources that might pertain to that, and media distributed by the classroom teacher, so videos or anything that is of web-based content. That would be then approved through that course adoption piece, that those are the mandatory pieces and expectations of teachers to utilize. The policy revisions go on to state that textbooks as defined, we currently have a textbook policy 2510. The adoption of textbooks are included in this definition of policy, and learning assessment materials designed or selected by the teacher, such as quizzes, tests, exams, worksheets, lesson plans, homework assignments, and the like, are not selected by the board and therefore not considered instructional materials for the purpose of the policy. You might be questioning why those things are not considered instructional materials. I can give examples around many of them. Learning assessment materials are things such as quizzes. So let's say a student takes a quiz that is developed by our new middle school math curriculum but does not do well, and the teacher offers a retake. Those programs do not provide retakes or additional assessment materials, so that would be teacher-developed additional quizzes, tests, or exams. Worksheets might be something that there's additional work for homework and practice at home that the program, it might go above and the teacher might have the need based on student data to provide additional practice and work at home. That would be considered not instructional materials, but something that's teacher created, as well as homework assignments that might incur additional practice that the board would not approve all of said things that might go beyond the scope of our curriculum. That being said, any materials that are supplemental in nature for reading, book lists, activities, online, or media would run through the Teaching and Learning Committee for approval to the full board.
Okay, thank you. This one kind of caught my eye as I was going through it. I would think if you would ask any parent out there, is a lesson plan or a quiz or a test part of instructional materials, they're going to say yes.
Yep.
They would just equate those two things together. But if we need to separate them for the purposes of policy, I guess we can do that.
Yeah, and it's, the language here is to define that as learning assessment materials. That's to measure the impact of the instructional materials and the application of students.
Certainly.
So adoption of textbooks, comma, are not included in this definition of learning policy. When you were stating that, you said they are included.
They are in policy 2510, which is our
But I'm
separate
saying,
policy.
define, so we have textbooks as defined in 2510 dash adoption of textbooks are not included in this definition or policy. So textbooks have nothing to do with this particular policy
Correct. So you might have,
because they fall under 2510.
yes.
Okay. So then we come to learning assessment materials designed or selected by a teacher. So we're saying all the following if utilized as learning assessment materials. How is a worksheet or homework not instructional materials?
Because those are practice. So there might be the scope of supplemental readings, books, activities up above might be a worksheet. But if there's the need for additional practice and the program, let's say, whether it's our middle school math program, Bridges elementary math program, a science program, social studies has a standard one-sheet worksheet for said lesson, but there's need for additional practice for a student, then we're limiting that the teacher's not utilizing data that, I'm looking right at you, Kim. Kim needs additional practice, therefore more homework in that area or an additional worksheet that's developed would be at the discretion of the teacher based on the needs of the learning assessment materials.
But if I read this, I could say any worksheet. I said, no, not just like individually identified worksheets or lesson plans or homework assignments. So if I, as a teacher, decide to assign my class to read X or complete homework sheet X, right? How is that not part of the instructional materials?
I'd say if it's a reading, it would fall above in the first sentence.
I'm using reading as an example. So if it's, what if it's science based, or right? Because we could have reading in that. Now I see less and less homework coming home with kids, anyways. Having 3 of them, the amount of homework that comes home is staggeringly low from what I've seen. But and if I just look at this in a commonsensical approach, everything listed there is an instructional material.
Then under that approach, then we'd have to approve every piece of paper or online piece that goes home through the board.
We could approve every, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about our high school programming, we currently, past practice has been there are no programs, they're teacher created. We have no approved curriculum in the middle school on record in reading, social studies, and various areas of coordinated arts. In elementary is the same in reading, social studies. Science is kind of a mixed bag as well as social studies. So as we go through the curriculum review process and you as a board adopt, we do approve then those instructional materials as you want to see defined in this policy.
So is the purpose of this to give that separation of the board approves one set of things and these other things the board does not approve?
Correct, with the discretion of if there's concern around it, then that would be acted on administrative locally, as well as defining the difference between materials and then obviously equipment, which is a little more clear cut that a microscope is and
Yeah.
a DVD player and a whiteboard.
projector.
Right, those are
Sure.
equipment, not materials. Our current policies, I can show you up here, is this. I read that through today. So this provides much more detail than the current policy that's in place.
So with this policy then, supplemental books, readings, any online resources and media, that would still be subject to board approval,
So you think about our last teaching and learning meeting, Dreambox.
right,
Previously, it had been used.
right,
It was removed from teacher use because of budgetary concerns. And then it was brought back forward by Mr. Miziak to the Teaching and Learning Committee in order to approve it and then go to finance versus it just continuing, similar to other online resources.
right. And as we move through the different curriculums, like reading and everything, and the math, we're kind of hopefully selecting resources that have things built into them,
Mhm.
obviously,
So
right?
we don't
that
have
we
this
aren't having
Buffet
to
table
have this.
of everything.
Right, because then if you have different multiple classes, you have these kids learning this, and, you know, the supplemental materials that they use will not be consistent throughout.
Yep, as well as the goal with a reading series that is universal, there's also a reading list with supplemental books and other readings. That this is the expectation of, here are the fence lines around what we utilize as materials, and that it's not, I'm just grabbing random books I want to teach. It's, no, these are related to the course adoption by the board and the standards that the board has approved as well, that relate back to the curriculum work that Mr. Miziak's doing, and it's clearly articulated. In these grades, here are the books that you will read, and here's how they relate to the standards and how they'll be assessed.
Right,
But in an assessment manner, if there's a need to reassess or assess differently or think differently about where kids are in learning, that's at the discretion of the teacher. So you think about any project, if we would have to have approval of projects because you could consider those homework assignments.
right,
And that's an assessment of learning.
right. And the instructional equipment, that is also something that the board is going to be approving, or is that the teachers? When it talks about computing devices, projector screens, smart boards, chalkboards. I mean, cause a lot of that is going to fall
Yeah,
under.
that, we don't have policy around equipment approval, but if anything exceeds 15,000, that comes to the finance committee and probably through the teaching and learning committee. So if we were to go forward with, you know, let's look at anytime new computers, right? That's educational equipment that just came through the teaching and learning committee for
Right.
various needs, and that's come throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. And what is, Mike's not here to ask, but WUFAR, WUFAR accounting?
WFR codes,
WFR,
those are our
yeah.
accounting codes that are universal across public entities for
Okay.
accounting purposes. So
Okay,
on the business office, everyone
Sure.
they have specific codes for reporting how we're spending
okay,
federal and local money.
gotcha. I guess the issue is just as how this is written, it's very confusing as far as, like, it doesn't specifically state, it defines something, but then it doesn't say what that necessarily means. Do you know what I'm saying? It just tells you what instruct materials are, and just, I guess, to just reiterate that they will be, you know, board approved.
And I'm happy to take your recommendation if you wanted to table this and work with Neola for further detail. I think this is similar to other policies we've seen in the past where this is the first go because this is an area that other districts want to clearly define. So Neola has brought this up for review, but I could see this one coming back similar to our anti-harassment policy as well as the
Self-reporting.
self-reporting that we have seen now come again as districts bring these forward to their boards. They're saying it's confusing with the language. Could it be a
Right.
little more spelled out?
So I guess that would be my recommendation, is that we table this and try to define and clear up the language so that there is no, you know, confusion or,
I can get behind that.
Yeah, I think I see what the intent is,
Mhm.
but I can see where it leaves a lot of gray to operate in and to probably overstep from learning assessment materials, right? And maybe that's what we're talking about
Yeah,
there,
and
and
define what
not
that means,
instructional
right?
materials.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's a second paragraph that has to go in and define that. So I think I'd be
Yeah,
willing to take another look at.
someone who's outside the education world, if you ask them, yeah, what
You-
off some instructional materials, they're going to give you a lot of the things
You know,
that are under
I-
the learning assessment materials section.
Yeah, I get
Right.
behind lesson plans, that's the teacher's game plan for the day, right? And that adapts day to day, and there's no way a board would ever sit here and physically be able to do that, right? I mean, that's just not how work can be done. But when I start seeing homework assignments, worksheets, exams, tests, quizzes, and I've seen great inconsistency on all of those throughout our district. Some great, some not great. So I think there's an opportunity here to take a little closer look at it.
Sure.
Okay. We'll mark that one as not moving forward.
Sure.
Correct.
I don't
Maybe
know if we can
call
get,
that out in the
get
motion.
Jake involved in
Yep,
that.
Jake and I actually met on this policy previously and again this afternoon after some conversation. And I think he reiterated some of the things I've said tonight, or validated some of the things I've said tonight. But I think there are key terms to Mr. Barney's point that a non-educational person, we have interpretations of some of these words, especially
Mhm.
under learning assessment, that could go in multiple directions, and we want policy to be tight so we're able to very clearly define that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and maybe it's as simple as, instead of calling it instructional materials, it's board-approved instructional materials,
Yeah.
but I guess we'll,
Yeah, course study approved instructional materials or whatever it
something,
might be.
yeah,
Yep.
but we'll, I guess, get some feedback to Neola and see if
Definitely,
they have a recommendation on rewording.
definitely.
Okay, that will take us to policy 5113, open enrollment program.
This policy seems to come, I think, every time we have a policy committee, as more and more changes. The policy is revised to include additional definitions that are cross-referenced in policy 5200 attendance. The additional language is included that specifies that the authority to terminate open enrollment based on habitual truancy and the reference to procedural requirements found in regulations from Wisconsin Administrative PI 36. Further, the provisions for termination in the cases of open enrollment into a non-resident school district virtual charter program as established by the Department of Public Instruction guidelines have been added. These are strongly recommended to comply with procedure requirements. I strongly recommend this as we are currently working through a couple cases in the district where we have students that are open enrolled in that are considered habitually truant. We follow the guidelines outlined in the recommendations because they should no longer receive a seat here, as well as we have students in virtual schools that are in open enrolled out that will have to return to us because they're not meeting the attendance guidelines. So the minor changes to truancy, part of school day, and tardiness, I strongly recommend that change of language, as well as termination of open enrollment when the requirements of attendance do not happen.
Yeah, I see a lot of common sense to all of that, right?
We know
Um,
that
Do we know how many students this is gonna affect?
2 at the most, in our currently that I'm aware of. I just received word from a virtual school this morning of a student that is a Germantown resident virtually, or open enrolled out into a virtual setting that's not meeting the attendance requirements that they're gonna be coming back. Vice versa, we have someone.
They're not meeting
Those,
the virtual schools attendance
which are the
requirements.
same attendance rules we
Which we
have
have.
there statewide.
Yeah.
Yep. As well as, someone who is given an open enrollment seat
Well, and I think
into the district and doesn't show up to
And I
attend.
think naturally there's probably a waiting list there.
Correct.
There's a long, I know, I experienced open enrollment when I lived in the city, and Germantown was not easy to get a seat in.
No,
Yeah, especially.
So if
when
we have
only-
people occupying those.
Yeah, we only have a couple open
Yeah, we just-
seats every year.
Correct.
So, yeah, long line and not a lot of openings.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions on that one? Okay, we'll move on to policy 5200, attendance.
Staying in the same lane, revision to this policy are made to clarify the types of student absences that require written approval versus that may be excused by phone call, as in customary practice in many districts. The policy clarifies that absences for physical or mental conditions, i.e. staying home sick, may be excused by a phone call. In circumstances justify it, such as prolonged absences, the office The attendance officer may require a healthcare provider's written statement with excuses which excuses the student for a maximum of 30 days. Separately, a parent may, by written notice, excuse a student for any reason for a pre-planned absence. The pre-planned absences, for any reason not limited to physical or mental condition, must be in writing and may not exceed 10 days of school per state statute. So it's just clarifying that except the parent excused pre-planned absence requires written notification as indicated below. I've talked with our principals about this and our practices that need to clean up and tighten this when it comes to written notification, which can even be signing your child out at school if you come to pick them up. And the school wasn't aware that they're going to the Dells for an extended weekend or being picked up early. The physical written signature and email also is considered written notification, which 9 times out of 10 is how parents notify in writing. No one's writing on a note card or handwritten piece of loose leaf and handing in. We do get that from time to time, but email does count as written notification.
Yeah, I think it's a timely. I know I've received a couple inquiries and questions on how we keep attendance and the accuracy of the documentation in it. So I don't know, as this goes out as an update, we can make sure all of our buildings are on the same page.
Yep.
With that, 'cause it seems like there's some inconsistencies.
We
throughout
just
there.
recently, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Ewert, because it's been brought to my attention last year of how we were identifying, coding, and our expectations around state statute when it came to attendance was inconsistent, specifically at the elementary level. We just ran a training with all elementary office staff on the last professional development day here, as well as one earlier in the year, to make sure we're all in accordance with what the difference is between a third of a day, 2/3 of the day, and a full day, and what that looks like coding wise, and making sure it's consistent, because that does have ramifications when tomorrow our state report card is released, and how we code and report attendance as part of On Track to Graduation, which we can lose points at the end of the day, but might make us look like we're not as successful as we are as a school district because of clerical issues.
Garbage data in, garbage data out.
Correct. Exactly. Those are the easy things that we can do right. So we've spent time with our principals and office staff on this policy.
Good. All right. Thank you.
I think there's just a grammatical error. It says student in the physical or mental condition.
Mm-hmm.
The last line says student for a period not to exceed 30 days. I think it's supposed to be not to exceed.
Thank you.
It's the reader
Sound
in me.
good?
I'm like, that doesn't sound right.
Thank you.
Appreciate that correction. Anything else on 5200? Okay, we'll move that one forward. 5215, missing and absent children.
This is just a revision to clarify that consistent with state and federal programs providing for safety and assistance in the case of missing or absent children, the school will provide a safe and secure location for a child, even if not a student during the school day, until authorities can be contacted and take responsibility for the child. Current policies suggest access at any time to school buildings, even if not presently open.
Any questions from the committee?
Seems like some good common sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't shoo children away from our buildings.
Correct. If they're in need
Yeah.
and there's
Help them.
someone there to help them, we help them.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Move on to 5250, which is being rescinded, one that we covered previously.
Yep, that's to rescind it, and all of the language that was needed from this is added to 2451.
All right. That takes us to a new policy, 5505, academic honesty.
Oh, this is one we need, right? We should have had. This is a new policy. This policy is provided to address the topic of academic honesty, but also to deal with the impact of emerging technologies that make engaging in academic dishonesty more accessible, such as artificial intelligence. And there's a policy later that is new related to that.
I noticed there's or designee. Do we
Yes.
want to specify a designee? It's
where you-
second to last sentence.
Yep.
District administrator or designee.
I
Would
think
that be Jake?
It could be Jake. It could be a principal. It could be I'm sorry, it could be any administrator at the district level as needed if Jake's unavailable.
Instead of naming him, could you just say the director of teaching and learning?
Then it verifies it's only Jake. Let's say Jake is out on
Right.
paternity leave, right? Or
Then we have
whatever
to
it might
keep
be.
going
Correct.
down a list.
So a designee, it could be Mr. Nowak if needed.
Yeah, as I read this, this would be how the students and or parents would appeal. If they see district administrator or designee, they're not gonna know who that designee is.
I understand what you're saying. I think something you'll see in future policy committee meetings is when we specify the designee, and there's multiple things going on, that designee becomes the doing all of the designee work. Because I'll give you an example of a compliance officer. We have one currently, and we don't have any language or designee. If the compliance officer is already engaged in multiple compliance office things plus their regular role, it's just, I'm trying to keep it a little more broad from a designee, and so one person isn't always.
And in that particular example, it sat as a compliance officer with a person that was named as the designee, and that person was no longer employed here.
Correct.
So we actually changed policy. And at the time, my thought was exactly that. We put the new person in there. That is now the compliance officer. And I almost wonder in that scenario, if we just wrote compliance officer.
In certain policies like Title IX and the anti-harassment,
Yeah.
you have to name per
Yeah.
statute.
I think I
But if
remember
you have
some
a
of that,
designee or designee, if that person's not able to do the work, we have other people trained to do that work as well.
Yeah, I just don't know who a parent is gonna reach out to if they wanna appeal.
I would think this would be like kind of a dean of students scenario, right?
Or an
At
assistant
the high
principal.
school or assistant principal, yeah. Or principal for that matter, but. I mean, is it almost better to list those positions? Cause obviously not every school has a,
We
Well,
could say business, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
This is a situation where the principal was the staff member that handed it down, so you wouldn't want the appeal to go to a subordinate of that person.
yeah, fair enough, yeah.
So in this case, we could say to the district administrator or director of teaching and learning, because there's two people there, and then they could work through who's gonna take this on, because of what you're saying, it went.
Yeah, I mean, we always want to provide a step, right? Because at some point, this could come in front of the board, I would assume.
No, according to this, the decision is final.
Yep.
I found that when I was reading that a little interesting, because it's usually in these types of, like a disciplinary situation, there's generally the buck always stops at the board if the parent or students choose to pursue that. Very rarely does that happen.
Correct, but when you're bringing it to the board level, you're gonna have people coming for hearings around academic dishonesty, and that could become heightened, similar to, we've had cases in the past around code of conduct in sports, that there's layers. Are we gonna continue to add layers all the way to the board level for final decision, when, if that's what the board wants to do from a governance standpoint, is here academic dishonesty, when it's gone to the principal and then district administration. Because it happens often, I'm not gonna lie, especially in high school, and it stops usually at the principal level, because it's gone through the teacher, and then usually the AP, and then the principal. It very rarely has gotten to me in the current setting of what's just our language in our student handbooks. I guess I'm fine either way, leaving it as designee or adding director of teaching and learning.
Okay, let's say someone's trying to appeal and you're unavailable. Melissa would still be there to answer the phone.
Correct. My designee would be Jake,
Probably Jake.
probably,
So,
or even Mike if it need be, because
Or-
Jake's unavailable. He has an academic background,
right,
or pupil service, depending upon what the issue at hand is.
sure. So
Or
do we
maybe
leave it
another
as-
administrator. It's not unrare to ask an administrator that's not in that building in that situation to intervene as another. So when our language around suspension is within 5 days of a suspension, a family has the right to appeal to district administration or designee. It's not always the superintendent that's going to
Sure.
respond. It's another administrator
But-
that's not even in the situation.
Can we solve this by saying, or designee assigned by the district administrator?
Yeah.
That way, you could delegate it, because you've assigned that person to work on these things. Not that that certainly gives a name for someone to appeal to, but it would start in your office.
Correct. And then I would.
If it was a principal that
if needed.
handed down the decision, right, then it would get appealed to you.
Yep.
Or whoever you designate.
That makes sense.
Committee, what do you think of that? Or do we just leave it as district administrator?
No, and I mean, I was thinking the same thing as far as saying designee as appointed by the district administrator, because it could change. But then you also look at it, like even if you said the director of teaching and learning, what are the odds that one, you or Jake are gonna be completely blindsided by, you know,
Correct.
something that's coming your way? So it's not like, you know, you're all of a sudden on your desk and we have 5 days. If it's getting that heightened to that, you know, where it's gonna be going to you, you would, I would think, have prior knowledge of it.
Yeah, I would think
So
if a
the
principal,
circumstances of it, you know, you or Jake not being available, or director of teaching and learning, I think if it's, this is something that is obviously, if you're looking at academic honesty, the two, if it's through the principal, the two that would make most sense are going to be the superintendent and teaching and learning, because they have the most knowledge of the curriculum and what's going on. So I guess I would be most comfortable with
With
saying
director of
the
teaching and
director of
learning.
teaching and learning, because it's very specific to curriculum and, you know.
Yeah, I can't argue against that. Sounds,
I think what you just said, Kim, is accurate. When there's been appeals of suspension, it's not like I get a phone call and go,
Well, where did that
day
come
4,
from?"
I'm appealing this. I knew I was
Right.
gonna begin a call or an email
Yeah.
within
Right.
2 or 3 days of the issue.
Yep.
All right, so instead of designee, we'll
Director of teaching.
label it director of teaching and learning.
sure.
All right, that takes us to policy 5517, student anti-harassment.
I think this one comes
Is
every
revised.
time.
Yeah.
This one, I don't have, sorry, a copy in front of me for some reason, it didn't get printed. But it was, addition, as you remember last month, or I'm sorry, last, policy committee in September when we discussed our staff, discipline and mandatory reporting, and guarantee warning was added to that. This policy is revised to better define the reference to guarantee warning. A reference to Neola provided, there's also a form that we keep in our board manual library related to what a guarantee warning is and the rights of that person being questioned.
Yeah, this language looks very similar to
It's
the previous
identical.
guarantee warning
Yep.
language
Mhm.
that we've added. Any comments or questions from the committee?
I think this policy will continue to be in revision constantly. It's a pretty important one.
All right, that takes us to 5530, student use or possession of intoxicants, drugs, or paraphernalia, revised.
This one was updated to reflect the ever-changing and expanding scope of drugs and drug derivatives, particularly marijuana, CBD, and hemp, all of which are being continuously experimented to create new and often unregulated compounds that have psychoactive effects. Schools are able to prohibit these substances, and this language is to intend to provide an expansive definition to cover current versions and not yet known future versions, which is sad that we have to have that policy, but it seems like every day there's something new.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to the legalities of law enforcement.
Right.
Right. I appreciate them updating this, because with everything new that's out there, if
Yeah.
they didn't update it, there'd be some loophole that someone
Well-
would be able to skate through.
Yeah, I think it's important, right, to cast that net of maybe not what the drug is, but what the drug does,
Yes.
and that's how you wrap your hand or head around it. So,
All right, anything else on that policy? Okay, we will move on to policy 6151, returned or outstanding stale checks.
We never have these, so we should be good. No, I'm just, this policy is updated, include procedures for handling payments made by check by the district that remain uncashed after a period of time determined by the policy. I believe it was selected in here 90
90
days was Brittany's recommendation. The applicable time period may be dictated by the banking institution if the institution's checks state a period of validity, or by policy, which was why we outlined that, if no validity period is established by the institution. The Department of Revenue handles unclaimed property, including payments made by the public entities that remain unclaimed. Process specific may change over time, so that the recommended policy language is to consult with the Wisconsin Department of Revenue's current guidance. And this was vetted through our business department.
Thank you, that was gonna be one of my questions. Any comments or questions on this one? Okay, we'll move that one forward. That takes us to policy 6236, Community Services Fund, Fund 80, a new policy.
Yep, this is a new policy, is offered to cover requirements under which the board may opt to utilize its authority to levy taxes for community programs through Fund 80. And this was also vetted through the business office. You can see that obviously this is something we experience every year as a
Yeah,
school
we
district
say
with
we
at
are-
the annual meeting.
We already do this, we're
Yep.
just
Putting in
putting a
language.
policy
Yep.
in for it. Any discussion?
No, there's just a correction on letter A, cost for any program or service that is limited to only district students.
Tim, I'm gonna call Neola and tell him,
I know, tell me.
we want our money back.
Right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, that will take us to policy 7250.01.
This policy is offered as a new policy to assist districts with requests for commemoration following the death of a student or staff member. It's not mandatory or required, but it is recommended so that there's guidance. I know I did field a couple questions related to the last statement sentence in green, and some thoughts on that. So I don't know if discussion by the committee, any recommendations here? It does say memorials are permissible only after a proposal is approved by you as a board. That we can't just start putting memorials up, or as any staff member in the district, it would have to come to the board for approval, whether it be physical plaque, a bench in the courtyard, whatever it might be.
Okay.
So I would like to make a suggestion to remove the entire paragraph in green. Reason being, this is singling out suicide as not an option for a memorial, and stating that it concludes that memorials contribute negatively to the contagion effect. Projects that are life-affirming are encouraged. I think singling out suicide as a something that we are not allowed to, or cannot memorialize is, it takes away, suicide is a tragedy, obviously, but there's been certain things that out of somebody's suicide, we learn from those. We have vets that have committed suicide. We've learned that, vets need to, the mental illness behind PTSD and everything like that. Mental health issues, body issues. Like, there's certain things that are good that can come out of a death, and that's what we're memorializing. We're memorializing the person, not how they died. So I think to take that away from a parent that does want to, memorialize their child that, something that went through, for us to put an absolute no
To
on
make it
suicide.
a non-starter.
Right.
Okay.
So I think just taking that and, obviously taking, looking at each individual circumstance is better than just singling out this and saying, no, that's just not something we're gonna look at.
And
That would be
ultimately,
my
it's the
recommendation.
board's decision regardless of the
Right.
cause of death.
Right. So that's.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, I think I'm with you.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move that forward. As a new policy, items to be approved by the board, and then we will not include that final
Strike
paragraph.
that whole, yeah.
Okay. Move on to policy 7440.01, video surveillance and electronic monitoring, revised.
This is a
policy.
revision that is recommended by Neola. This policy is revised to provide clarification on the notification concerning monitoring collected by video and, if applicable, audio collection technology. The policy revisions also refer to the school safety plan's determination of proper location of such equipment, which may need to remain confidential. Finally, reference is included in the policy to electronic monitoring on school buses, including specific regulatory authority for audio monitoring in that context. There's a note that has been incorporated by Neola as well to draw attention to the lack of clarity in the law relative to sufficient notice as consent in the context of audio monitoring.
I didn't look when I walked into this building, but do we have a visible notice that is provided to persons entering an area or building to tell them that we're doing video?
There's a
and or
surveillance,
audio
there's a
monitoring?
little placard when you walk in.
Yeah, I
that
think so,
says-
right
Is there?
at the front door.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't look when I walked in today
Yeah,
to see if it was
actually
there.
is. Yeah.
We do in every one of our main entrances of our school buildings. Because when this policy was last brought forward in September 2022, last year, there were additions to the notification, and the next day, I had Mr. Lord purchase consistent signs that says video and audio surveillance monitoring.
Excellent.
And our buses, right way, that's mandatory in the contract.
So unless they're really trying to drive the concept home, the first sentence is repeated twice.
They are, they're just trying to drive that home.
They are really testing you.
I know. I'll read
Kim,
it.
we were 3 for 3.
Woo.
Right?
She's 7 for 7, we just haven't gotten there yet.
I know, right?
All right. I did notice in the end here, it says if opting to employ audio surveillance, this should be done with legal consultation. I wondered if we've run that. It's the drafting note under notification of surveillance, bottom of the first page. Might be something just to
I
bounce
have a
off of
meeting
legal.
with
just to-
Mr. Pollard this morning, or tomorrow morning. I'll bring this up.
All right, thank you. That would take us to policy 7440.02, a new policy, smart monitoring equipment.
Yep, this is a new policy to address the emerging use of smart monitoring technology used to monitor for such things as vape smoke and the like. It's recommended but not required. We currently do not have any of this monitoring equipment in our buildings, but as a policy, Neola said, doesn't hurt to have on hand if you were to move forward with any type of vape detection, smoke detection in your,
Yep.
most likely bathrooms or locker rooms.
Awesome.
This is- Back in my day, it would be the teacher's lounge.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been vague.
All right.
Oh, how times have changed.
Any comments or questions on this one?
Not productive.
All right, we'll move on. Artificial intelligence, policy 7540.08.
I had AI write this one for us tonight.
How would you govern yourself?
Exactly. This is a new policy, obviously intended to address the potential impact of artificial intelligence in multiple district contexts. As cross-referenced in this policy, it's recommended but not required, and I assume this will be something that continually comes forward as we experience AI in our school
Good.
settings and in life.
Certainly, yeah, I expect revisions on this on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Can only imagine.
AI is
Part of me
very
doesn't
powerful.
want to.
Yeah, it's interesting.
All right, we'll move that one forward. Policy 8121, personal background check, contracted services, a new policy.
Yep, this is to help us or help the district have assistance in navigating the difficult task of protecting the security of school facilities and safety of students with an ever-increasing reliance on contract workers. in construction, work being done at school sites, or other services being performed by individuals that may have access to students. So it's just added language and policy related to expectations of contracted services, which we have every day, I would believe, in all of our buildings.
Yeah, I can appreciate these changes, definitely. Any comments or questions from the committee? Nope. All right. Policy 8146, notification of educational options.
This is revised policy to reflect the authority to satisfy the Class 1 notice requirements by publishing the notice on the district website. So we annually have to notify educational options that are also were done in print, as well as our website. Now we can do it through our annual notices on the website only, which saves us time and money
Right.
based on changes at the state level.
Any comments or questions?
Just the first sentence that's struck. Board recognizes the need to provide alternative means which a student achieves the goal of the district. Do we not recognize that, or are we just not stating that we recognize that? And it just seems odd.
I think it's unnecessary language. We have a statutory requirement to provide notification of educational options. If you want to leave that and feel that's the board's job to do that versus it's state law.
Yeah, it just was interesting. It's
That
an
it was
interesting
there in
sentence
the
that was
first
there in the
place.
first place.
Yeah.
So.
I think when this was created back in 2015, when educational options became mandatory, that was probably language that was provided in statute.
Fair enough.
All right. We'll move on. Policy 8420, school safety.
This is a revised policy to reflect the provisions of training consistent with school safety plan. In addition, the records retention requirements contained within Wisconsin State Statute 11807 sub 2A is included in cross-reference to our policy 8310 public records, which we last policy committee in September updated. In an effort to avoid conflict with the retention records requirements in light of changes to that policy. Finally, the citation of Wisconsin State Statute 12102 sub 1I is removed as that refers to toxic substances and lead, which are not covered by this policy. I think often when we think school safety, we think of violence. There are many aspects to school safety in general. So it's really about the update to the record retention pieces.
Committee, any comments or questions? No. Okay, we'll move that one forward. Policy 8500, food services.
Yes,
A lot going on. in
There's
this
a
one.
lot. Ms. Heaney, our supervisor of food services, did review this with Ms. Altendorf and agreed with the recommended changes from Neola. This has been revised to update verbiage, as always when food service policies come forward, from the USDA and require non-discrimination language, and to remove reference to redundant non-discrimination language included elsewhere in this policy. Likewise, the policy is revised to incorporate dietary modification options that are not pursuant to a medical request that complies with the federal regulations for such medically based modifications, but are still based on either non-compliant medical documentation or purely individual preference at the board's discretion. All of these guidance options can be seen on the DPI website. Further, this policy is revised in response to DPI auditor determination about policy requirements regarding permissible delinquent school lunch balances. The revisions generally remove the authority of the district administrator in place of the authority of the board, the determination of a set level of permissible delinquent school lunch account balances, as opposed to allowing a determination be made by the administration based on the program experiences, etc. The current policy language does not lend itself to individualized determination of permissible account balances, such that concerns of discriminatory practice are not realistic. So you'll see many edits here, specifically language related to dietary modifications and the authority of the school district, as well as then implementation and discontinuation, and discontinuation of specialty dietary requests, as far as us holding accountable to families who do request that through our school lunch program that is still needed if said dietary limitation goes away, which often doesn't, but we're not making special modifications just because someone wants it. It's a need for a medical reason.
So some of this green is crossed out. These were options that were provided,
These
and
were
we're choosing not to.
Correct.
Okay.
So everything option is laid out. Ms. Heaney then went
Yep.
through and put her recommendations for what to strike.
I'll give you a minute if you wanna keep going through it. I didn't have any comments
No, I didn't
or
either.
concerns with this.
No, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
Mr.
Sometimes
Brown?
there's too many options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for clarity, it says the board shall approve and implement nutritional standards governing the types of food and beverages that may be sold, blah, blah, blah. Do we get involved in the selection of food and what can and can't be offered? Milk, we don't have 2% milk. Is that something the board would take a look at and say, why don't we offer 2% milk? You know, it probably comes from national guidelines at one point, but
We probably approve the guidelines,
'Cause-
and then it gets implemented from there.
Because of the approved guidelines then provide us funding. So that's most likely. The
But no,
USDA
I don't think
guidelines.
anything has come to the board saying,
Green beans.
will you or will you not approve 2%?
Mine
Brussels
would be
sprouts.
But is that something the board can hear, or didn't that come from, what was the Nutrition Act years ago?
Correct,
Michelle
those
Obama did?
USDA guidelines
Yeah.
that state, if you follow these guidelines, then here's the reimbursement you have from the National Food Program.
So if you step outside those guidelines,
Then you
do they-
lose, would most likely lose funding, is my understanding.
Cause you take a look at the health standards of, I brought up milk, so I'll use milk, 2% milk versus we offer chocolate and strawberry, 1% milk. Well, one's loaded with sugar and a bunch of other stuff, and that's okay, but pure 2% milk isn't. It's just things that we look at.
That is a federal program in a nutshell.
Right, so.
Just like they say you must take servings of certain fruits and vegetables, even though kids throw them directly in the garbage.
Right, and waste it.
But it's on the plate to say it's a balanced meal. So the balance of sugar is probably from those milk to get kids to drink milk versus having desserts as part of where you can purchase your desserts.
Right.
But that's not
I
the
mean,
standard lunch.
I get all that, but that is this saying though that the board shall approve and implement that?
Where are you, Eric? I'm sorry. Page.
My reading of it is, yes, technically we could.
It's on that very first page of 8,500 food services. And
The-
then you
the
go down
last
to where it
paragraph.
says A, B, and then the next one is C. It's the last paragraph before A and B.
Board shall improve and implement nutrition standards governing the type of foods and beverages that may be sold on the premises of its school and shall specify the item and place each type of food or beverage may be sold. In adoption, such standards, the board shall, then A, B, and C.
Yeah, the consultant incorporate to the maximum extent possible the dietary guidelines for Americans jointly developed by the USDA and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And the consult and incorporate the USDA Smart Snack in School Nutrition Guidelines. So those would be the pieces that they're saying the board
Can take a look at.
shall approve the implementation of that, which then clearly articulates, like, we have some work to do in our buildings with selling of snacks or candy during the school day that can only, according to federal guidelines, happen a maximum of twice a year for fundraising type events. So if they're selling cookies for a fundraising cause at lunch, that can only happen a certain number, in policy, a certain number of days, a certain number of times per year.
Federal
per-
policy, not.
Yep, in school board policy as well, so that we're not promoting unhealthy lifestyle or trying to sell food throughout the day, just like vending machine. We have vending machine policy, that relate back to federal
Right.
guidelines of when vending machines can be on or can't be on during the school day and what can be in them.
I remember looking at that policy a couple years ago. I thought it had to do with you can't sell a snack at the same time that it might compete with your lunch program.
Correct.
So if they sell it outside of lunch, I think they had a little bit longer leash, I guess, as to what they could do.
Same with selling other items that might be for fundraising events, candy bars, whatever, during that might compete,
Yeah,
but there's
makes
also limitations of how often you can do that through a school year.
Okay.
One of the challenges to the student lunch program is just from when my son, because it changed, I think, quite a bit when my son was in school, and the portion size for, like, my son, who's like a 230-pound athlete, had to, got the same lunch as, 100-pound girl, and he's like, starving.
Yep.
So it's hard to really look at the dietary needs of each individual student and make it the same.
Universal
because
somehow,
yeah,
yeah.
it's just, he was, I need 3 lunches today, please.
Yep.
Yeah, blows through a school lunch program pretty quick, your budget.
So, looks like
Sidebar.
if we approve this, we're giving ourselves some more work so we can approve and implement nutrition standards.
Well, that
But I-
was already in there, it's just adding.
We can have Ms. Heaney report annually. What I like to see is supervisors of other departments do an annual report, similar to the, we've done in the past, nurses report of the current state of that programming, and then that would open for conversation regarding what you're talking about, Mr. Brown. Or clarification, I don't
Right.
by any means I'm not a expert in that field. I like to eat.
Mhm. All right, anything further on that policy? Okay, we'll move that one forward. It takes us to 8531, free and reduced meals.
So this was also reviewed by Ms. Heaney. This is, policy is revised to update language to assure it matches USDA's required non-discrimination language. Adoption of this revision is required to maintain USD-approved policy language for free and reduced meals.
So since it's required, I guess we don't have a choice but to
Yeah.
move it forward, but I'll ask if there's any questions. All right, the next one, 9210, parent organizations, which we are rescinding.
Yep.
And then, I guess that gets combined with the next policy, 9211, district support organizations.
Yep, this is a new policy to add an option to include a requirement that any organization described in this policy requires advance permission to use any of the district's identifying logos, names, and, if applicable, slogans or taglines used by the district or one of the schools in the district. At the end of the day, we don't want people using their likeness,
Mhm.
what could be positive, but it also could be negative without express written consent by the school district.
Do we know how many currently do?
I don't know, I have an exact number, but I'm aware of a handful that we'll
The-
reach
the-
out to.
The reason I bring this up is it's explained to me that potentially somebody was making donations to an organization, assuming it was to the school, because they had no idea that the particular group was not associated. I shouldn't say associated. That was run by that particular organization wasn't run by the district. Which, when I see this, I can see exactly why this language was probably needed.
Mhm.
I think they figured out what they needed to figure out on their own. I was glad that all worked out, but it was eye-raising to see that there was that blurred of a line, that someone would make a financial donation to something, not understanding it wasn't the district.
Directly to the school district.
Yeah.
It's no different than when people using our likeness on social media, those type of things as well, and you
I
assume
think that played into it.
you see a Facebook account or an Instagram account with the school's logo or whoever it might be, and has no affiliation to the school district, and it could pose a negative or positive image for the district, but at the same time, we're not aware of that, or have given that consent.
All right, anything further on district support organizations? Okay, I will entertain a motion if someone so chooses.
Sorry, I'm looking for the.
Back at the beginning of the topic.
So
Hold on here a minute.
if we make a motion, we're tabling policy 2521,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So we'll have to exclude that from the recommendation, correct? Because we're not moving forward with.
Be to approve
as
all
is.
district policies presented tonight, revisions, with the exception of
Policy, and then
Policy,
do we need to do that for the one that we're striking?
2521.
So, historically, what we've done is just per discussion of the meeting, we'd be recommending all edits that were, there's a recording of what we agreed on as far as edits go. But we would have to say all policies brought forward except 2521. I'm just looking for it. I can do it if you'd like me to. I'll make a motion to move forward with a positive recommendation to the full board to approve the updated modifications in district policies as discussed, policy numbers 0100 through 9800.01, with the exception of policy number 2521, selection of instructional materials and equipment, which shall be tabled for further discussion.
I will second.
All right. Thank you for the motion and the second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. All right, then we'll move on to item B, discussion regarding proposed policy 2133, class size.
Thank you. This is an administrative recommendation. Neola does not have a policy related to class size. I bring this to you tonight is just to discuss and look at a first draft I've drafted a few months ago related to class size. This plays a specific role when we think about elementary and for elementary buildings. Determining class size is essential to our academic success across the district and system, but it's also essential towards our operations and staying fiscally responsible to the community at large, as well as providing a desired size that allows teachers to excel at what they do every day. This class size policy, if you look to page 2, has desired class sizes. That I use that terminology on purpose so that it's not finite. Those are the desired sizes. That would be a recommendation of looking back at enrollment data for the last 3 to 4 years. We have had discrepancy, specifically at the elementary level, from building to building. Some of that can be based on vocalness of community, vocalness of staff, or the willingness of some staff and some certain buildings to say, yep, how many of our kids we have, we're good to go. We are going to be getting into class size discussion very soon. As we get into the winter months, middle and high school students will start to select their classes for next year, which then allows us to determine FTE at the secondary level, build a staffing plan, and then that starts to tier down to look at what reductions or additions we need to make, as well as we can develop steady class size numbers across the system at elementary, which then allow for us to understand if there's a need for non-renewal. We look at retirements, those type of things, as well as it helps us determine more finitely our available space for open enrollment in, which can help to stabilize sections so we don't have bubble sections specifically at the elementary over time. And it helps us really determine those performing or those elective areas too that might run at smaller class sizes because there's specific niche needs, but it also helps. I can give the example at the high school level, the CTE teachers will often talk to kids who have signed up for their classes and say, hey, can you take this next year? Because right now we're only gonna have 10, 11 kids in this class, but we'll offer it next year and we can have a higher class size. Instead, why don't you take this class to bump up class sizes? They're all helping the kids understand that they can take the programming they want, but it helps us not have to eliminate courses because maybe a handful or less than 15 kids have signed up for a course. So I wanted to bring this forward tonight for just discussion and any questions you might have, and possibly bring this back in December to the full board for further discussion and possible action, as it sets some guidelines and boundaries that are missing in our school district when it comes to determining class size. It provides transparency to the community on where we fall from a ballpark of expectations around class size, as well as our staff, and they know, depending upon what building they're at and grade level they're teaching, kind of that where we are in the desired state.
I'm surprised we haven't had this policy before, because I remember seeing, I guess we'll just call it our standard practice, but apparently it wasn't backed up with policy.
Correct. There was a sheet I inherited called desired guidelines or guidelines, but it was never, from what I can find, any board action on it. So it was open to the interpretation of whoever developed it, which then allowed for kind of, for lack of a better term, when it comes to determining sections, kind of politicking on whoever was the loudest got a reduction in section or addition of sections without any numerical value behind it or district policy around it. I did reference surrounding districts that do have policies like this, and they're very similar in desired sizes.
I guess I'm happy to see something come forward that formalizes this. I think that's, in my time on the board, we've seen a lot of those types of things across multiple areas, and this is one of them. We've seen it, I think if you ask any citizen or parent, small class size is better, right?
Mm-hmm.
More individual time with teacher. I cannot agree with that anymore, right? As a parent, there is probably a few studies in this world that have been done around class sizes. I'm guessing some of that drives these numbers we see in front of us, along with there is a dollars and cents business question that has to be answered around class sizes and when is too small unaffordable and when is too big unmanageable. I'm assuming all that took place as building this out. It's my time on the board. I've seen this discussion weaponized more against the district or the board or both on multiple levels across multiple topics, ranging from what's best to students to what's best to staff. So that to not have some formalization around it and expectations set around it was a bad place for the district to be. So I'm glad we're moving forward in a discussion to set some of that parameter.
Yeah, I appreciate that it calls out that the board must balance small class sizes with fiscal responsibility and space limitations. You know, use an example of a 5th grade desired class size of 25. If you get one more student, you're not necessarily going to split it and have 2 classrooms of 13 students.
Correct.
Fiscally, that just doesn't make sense, and you may not even have the space to be able to do that.
As well as you think about, that could be at this elementary and across town, you have 3 sections of 25. Now, what are we saying to our staff, right? Because we're not going to run a section of 26. We're going to have 2 13, right? So now it's what my workflow is very different. To your point, Mr. Ewert, smaller is always better. Everyone, that's the way to go. However, the research is very clear that it's the effectiveness of the time you spend with kids, and we don't want to overload to 30 plus kids in a class, but we're not going to your point, Mr. Burney, okay, 26, now we're cutting that to 2 sections and, you know, hiring a brand new teacher.
And the one thought that I had, I like obviously how it's progressive as far as, you know, as they mature, they're, you know, you have larger class sizes. My only question would be as far as once they get to like junior, senior year, kind of prepping them for college, you're no longer going to have a small class size. So for allowing for maybe a larger class sizes, especially for college prep courses, where they are going to be potentially in a room full of, you know, 100 people. I'm not saying we have 100, you know, student classes, but if we have the room in certain classes for some of these kids to get the idea of, you know, being one in, you know, 35 or 40 kids, where I still have to, you know, be able to do the work. So maybe more of the college prep classes or the, so that they are kind of getting ready for that. Just a thought.
Yeah, and we're in a traditional brick and mortar building that space is always a limitation as
Right.
well, right? If
Yep,
you can jam a bunch of kids in a science lab, but then there's not enough space for everyone. I'm sitting
Right.
watching
Yeah.
someone
Right.
else do the science experiments. It's that, I think there's language in here about the balance of
Yep.
what makes the most sense and how are we preparing them for the future, but also they're still engaged in learning.
oh yeah, 100%. And obviously with lab type classes, it's,
Yep.
you know, you're not gonna be able to, you know, cram 50 people, but, you know, in a class where it's maybe social studies or, you know, history or something like that, where
Yeah,
they
I mean,
do kind of get that idea, like, well, there's a lot of people in here, but I still have to,
I've seen that firsthand. I think we had in math at the high school.
Last year.
We had an issue with some staffing, but it was not a foreseen scenario.
Correct.
So we were making do as best we could. And it looked, I think the solution ended up being 2 classes were put combined, but then there was 2 instructors in it. One with, I think, a little less experience than one of our top end math educators in that school. And they made it work, and they were in that, what's it, the auditorium room, I forget what it's called.
Yeah,
It's
the
got
lecture
that
hall,
Lecture hall.
Yep.
Um,
which is
it-
probably our only physical space to
Yeah, that's,
utilize as
so,
a college
just to
atmosphere.
have that,
Yeah.
you know.
Is that the PAC?
No,
No,
there's a
it's-
room
Send them to the PAC too.
right well, the band and choir, right, that
Yeah.
space is used throughout the day, and you'll see the language for performing arts is those teachers want bigger classes because
Sure.
you want
Well,
someone
you-
playing
you-
every instrument.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Band versus multiple sections.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, just a thought.
Yep.
What is the
Are we,
plan for this policy? Bring it back to the next policy committee meeting?
Yeah, I'm not sure when our next committee meeting is. I think
Might
when
be a
you and
while,
I
'cause we have
spoke,
to
it
get
might
an
be a while.
update from
I
the
didn't.
next
I wanted to bring it forward tonight to see if this would make sense to bring to maybe a full discussion under new business at the December board meeting.
I think if we gave everybody, I would like to hear
Mhm.
from more than just this committee on this one, cause this is gonna be, there's numbers in here that I think some people will be like, that's a lot.
Mhm.
And I think there's also numbers in there that we're like, you know, we're not gonna come close to that. We don't have the enrollment to be at 21 or 27 on some of our classes. I think it'd be good for the entirety of the board to really sink their brain into this one.
Certainly. I can call it out when I give the update
Yeah.
at the next board meeting and reference this. Give everybody a month essentially to sleep on
Ask
it.
questions, yeah, and if
Yeah.
we do need to just reconvene as a policy committee around this and the other table policy, we sure can do that.
It can be nice to see some of the data points that
Mhm.
were used in deriving this. Maybe are comparables to some of the surroundings, if that's
Yeah,
even
the only other
possible.
district of, when I look at our comparables related to our comp study, Cedarburg had policy similar. The other districts I just spoke with, and
Yeah, I
it's
meant
more
just,
of the, what you were spoken to,
Your
Mr.
standard
Barney.
practice?
Yeah, I mean, I can give an example of one of our neighboring districts. Class size in 4K is 25. Like, that's their ceiling, which just seems like a lot. But then they staff that with 2 aides. So
yeah, teacher in 2 aides, yeah.
yeah. So do we want a smaller class size that's more, and you see the language there that our current practice is once we reach 16, there's an aide in that time with.
I think it goes, that comp study shines a lot of light on the inability to find apples to apples comparisons.
Correct.
Because while one might have 25 and we'd have 21, but it's a
Well,
teacher,
their revenue limit's 13,000 and ours is 10,000,
But a
right?
teacher and 2 aides, right, versus a teacher and an aide, or right? Like it never seems to give us a,
Yep, and this doesn't
A-
factor in if you have students with IEPs, you have a
Yeah.
cross-categorical teacher in there, or aid supports, there's, especially at the elementary level, it's hard pressed to find a lower elementary classroom with less than
but I think if we could see
2
some.
people in there, but they're designated for a specific
Yeah.
purpose.
I think when I look at it, it's to help set a framework, a context around what we're talking about. So if we can see potentially what other communities are faced with as far as class sizes, and I mean that's from a national level to a local level, right? And understand the framework that we're dealing with, and then these numbers start to make sense. Right now, we just see numbers on a board, and And if we can provide a context of how we got there and how does that stack up comparably around, I think that helps the community understand why those numbers are potentially a solid landing spot for us.
I think too, something that's a misnomer is the way DPI reports out teacher to student ratio across the state is they take total number of students and divide it by total number of certified staff. So already you have people who aren't necessarily classroom teachers but considered certified staff. Counselors, social workers, school psychologists, cross-categorical teachers, OTPT, interpreters, all the other people that we talk about in personnel committee and we hire as a school district, but then they're factored in. So it might say, oh look, it's 15 to 1.
It's one of the most misleading numbers they
Statistic-
produce
yes.
statistically. It's
Yeah.
actually it's atrocious because to help a community understand what we're talking about and then mislead the conversation by that much is
Right.
kind of a joke.
Yeah.
But maybe we could provide some of that context.
Sure.
All right. Any further discussion on proposed policy 2133?
This
Okay.
is under new business, but we're not taking any action.
There is no action
Yeah.
on our agenda for this item. So as discussed, I'll bring it forward in my update
Yeah, it's
that
a
I do at the
report.
board meeting, and we'll look to see it probably in December.
Will we have another committee meeting before that, or we'll just
Probably not. I would think it
Just
would go to the full board.
full
which
board
will
understand? Okay,
Give the full board opportunity for
Yep.
discussion.
that can.
The next Neola round is not until the spring.
All right.
What will I read between now and then?
I can send you plenty of things.
All right. I
Perfect.
will entertain one final motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I will second.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at 6:07. Thanks for coming and drive home safely.
Yeah.